Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American Experience. I'm your host, Carrie Ann, and today we're going to be diving into a very relevant, layered conversation that's been building on this podcast since its inception, and one that connects our cultural heritage to how we show up and lead in the workplace. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for a minute, you might remember I've mentioned a workshop called Confidently Caribbean at Work. And this was recorded many years ago. I think this was in 2020. And before that, we've just had many conversations about working. Now, one of the things that that is important to me is our professional strength has a lot of our culture and heritage behind it. It's a leadership asset or a heritage, and it's a strategic advantage, right? And so today, I'm glad to be taking the conversation even further with someone who brings a fresh, outsider, yet very connected and researched perspective. And that is Dr. Kerry Mitchell Brown. Yes, two Kerrys on the podcast today. And oh, Kerry and the last name too. Imagine that,
I
right?
know.
So even though Dr. Brown isn't of Caribbean heritage herself, she works with women of Caribbean heritage, and her work powerfully validates some of the things that we've been discussing on the podcast and something that I've been working or developing with the Caribbean diaspora experience model, and something particularly as heritage as a professional strength. Dr. Kerry Mitchell Brown is a nationally recognized organizational theorist, leadership strategist who's been working not only with Caribbean women, but Black women across all sectors to develop what she calls transformative leadership rooted in cultural intelligence, community, and radical self care. Dr. Kerry, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am amazing and I am so glad to be here with you. I've been following Carry On with Friends for a little bit now, and I love how you created space for these authentic conversations about the Caribbean experience here in these United States.
I know.
And it is so funny how we both have the same name almost. And so this connection makes me feel like this conversation was just meant to happen, right? Like
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Carrie. And so I didn't have a middle name like formally growing up and as my middle name, right? And Brown is my married name. So I'm Carrie Ann Brown too, as far as I'm concerned.
No, this is and you
um,
fall right in because the saying goes, if you meet a Carrie or a Carrie Ann, there's a chance that there's the Jamaican root somewhere in there.
yeah.
So
And it's
you're
spelled exactly the same. And that is so rare because it's the male version spelling of Carrie. So I'm exactly in the right place at the right time having this conversation. And Carrie Ann, you are correct. I do not have Caribbean heritage, but as a Black girl growing up in the Midwest, Omaha, Nebraska, to be exact, I didn't have a whole lot of exposure to Caribbean women, Caribbean people, much in the Midwest growing up. But all of that changed when I went to college. So moving from the Midwest to the East Coast in a city where there were just a lot of transient folks. It was a military town. And in that environment, there were Caribbean folks, Caribbean women became some of my closest and strongest connections. And these relationships, they date back 30 plus years, and they have really been foundational to who I am today.
wonderful. All right, so let's take a step back and start with your background and
Yes.
your profession as it is. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the work specifically with Caribbean women. So what is, I did say you're an organizational theorist, but what exactly is the work that you do, and how are you working with women across the board?
Sure. So I have my own consultancy. So I studied organizations as part of my doctoral studies, both in practice and in moving through organizations, and was really interested in how Black women both navigated and not just survived in organizations, but actually thrived in organizations. And I started doing that within organizations through their organization development department, and then several years later, started my own consultancy.
I'm so fascinated by this. What fascinates me about the work that you do, as I mentioned in the prior workshops that I did, I had like this handout because I had to learn the hard way how to navigate the workplace, because my parents, and when I say parents, I use that term broadly,
Hmm.
because in the Caribbean we are a multi-generational family structure. So I'm talking my uncles, my
Hmm.
grandparents, the aunties and stuff, including my, parents. And they didn't really teach us on how to show up or to work and succeed in American corporate structure or American corporate life. And for me, I had the shock of my life when um in 2000, let me back up. Let me make sure I get this clear. So up until 2010, I was good because I was working with a generation of Americans, maybe the older generation, who were very focused on, let's get this work done, heads down. And
Hmm.
then I think when the younger generation came into the workplace and wanted to be a little bit more social and friendly, that was very different from what my Caribbean upbringing would say, that this is how you should go to work, and how the older generation, maybe the boomer generation and the generation before, were operating. And this became very challenging for me. And so one of the things that I did was I came up with this worksheet for people to try to identify what type of organization they were in. So I said all of that to get to the worksheet, to this thing about organizations. Have you figured out archetypes for different organization in your work? Like general, maybe you don't, but I'm just curious. Are organizations in general or broad archetypes that can help you decode certain things about how the organization functions?
It's all very different and dependent upon the organization, and more importantly, their culture, right? And it's all very different, right? So um, the person who leads, or the group who leads the organization, they set the tone for what that organization does. It's not necessarily or always about the policies of the organization, it's what people do and how they enact those policies. There are always systems that signal to us what matters and what doesn't, and who matters in those systems and who does not, right? And depending upon how far someone is from the what I call the denomination line, and those are factors related to all types of identities that make up who we are. Um, the closer you are to that line, the closer you are to the power of that line, often will determine, what side of that equation you are on, the important or not so important. And so it varies across it varies across different types of organizations, different types of governing structures. A lot of times, you know, they're in these categories around corporate structures and progressive structures, and sometimes there's a whole lot of overlap, right? And it's really about the culture, like what do the people who lead these organizations espouse about their values, and about the outcome and how they treat the people who actually make up the organization, and then what are the internal systems that manage the people from the start on, what attracts them there, how they treat people while they're there, and the process, when they leave, either voluntarily or as people are forced out. So it's not as cut and dry, as it used to be when there were is not as diverse of a workforce as we have when we have multiple generations, within a workforce. But what I would say about organizations is that they are perfectly designed to get the outcomes that they get, which means that you can change them. Organizations are ran by humans, right? And you can influence human behavior. And that's often um, what's missed in these practices around organizations, as if they're just these standalone brick and mortars that just are what they are, neutral, and that they can't be changed. But they absolutely can be changed, and they can be changed for good, to where they serve the majority of the population instead of a select few.
Wonderful. So, organizations, there's no one set way, there's no archetype for an organization. It varies based on the leadership, the culture. The culture is intangible. It's people, what they do, how they do it, what they say, don't say, all that other good stuff. And I think one of the things that you've said is organizations are run by people. And if they're run by people, you can influence human behavior. So that's a critical point. So let's what let's get back to what brought you here. So you've observed Caribbean women in leadership roles, or you've observed Caribbean women just in work, right? And I mean, other than your move from Nebraska to a place where there was just a lot more people that you're interacting with from all cultures, what really drove you to explore leadership for when it comes to Caribbean women?
Well, I've had the privilege to walk alongside these incredible leaders as they've navigated environments not designed for their success, or success for Black women in general. And I was in these environments as well. And these have been some of the most powerful, grounded relationships in my life. So, relationships built on love and care, not just collective pain or trauma. And I've had the privilege to witness firsthand their brilliance, their resilience, and innovative approaches to leadership. And I would say first as colleagues and as coworkers, and then through my consulting work, and the most meaningful and dear friends in this journey called life. Some of my biggest collaborators now are Caribbean women, and we work together on projects. We work together in leadership.
In your work, you describe cultural intelligence as a superpower. Um, Cultural intelligence, could we define that? And then let's talk about practically how it is a superpower and how does that apply, or how does that show up practically at work?
Yeah, when I talk about cultural intelligence, so oftentimes we hear cultural intelligence, and it's referred to as this process of understanding about the cultures of people, people that make up the world, or in this context, the workplace or the workforce. Um, where they come from, their preferences around, communication, um, something more recently, the preferences around pronouns, preferences around communication styles, and just a number of things. And also, often, sometimes what we don't talk about is, you know, preferences around or processes around assimilation to the dominant culture, right? But what that means is teaching us to learn about everyone else, where you spend a lot of time and energy, and often at the expense of leaving your culture at home or at least at the door, right? And what I like to talk about, and where I say to use, culture as your superpower, is this mentioning that it's not just social skill, right? And so I'll share with you something around one of my clients, and also a friend, and through my years of research and close work with Caribbean American women leaders, there's something that I observed that I would say is pretty remarkable, is the way that they have navigated multiple worlds, right? So you talk, Carrie Ann, about the lessons that you learned from your uncles and your family, your large generational family, about how to move into work both at home and community and in the workplace here in the US. And I've witnessed these women to code switch without even thinking about it, right? They move between cultural spaces with ease. And that's just not a cultural skill, that's like a superpower, right? The ability to engage with folks not from the Caribbean culture, and the ability to immediately slip in to a Caribbean dialect with someone that you know is from your island or a neighboring island, and in a way that you all feel at home with each other, right in a meeting or a breakout room, just to have a cultural connection, and then right back into the space, right? And so, just thinking about that in a global marketplace, who's better to bridge that than someone who's been doing it their entire life, right? Like, that's a superpower. Most people that has lived in one particular environment, and you know if I use myself for example, like, and living and growing up in the Midwest, and um you know moving to the East Coast, I mean, that's not, it's a little bit of different, but that's not changing worlds, right? It's changing, major environments.
I appreciate the word superpower because, a lot of times when I do just that, even here on the podcast, people are like, whoa, I believe it's a superpower. I think there's a place where people feel like, but I don't want to code switch. But I think it's not code switching. And there's a future episode coming up. It's language, right? So
Right.
going into, you know, our accent or language, it is a separate language. So
Hmm.
we don't think of it as being bilingual, but in a way
Hmm.
it is.
It absolutely is.
And so, it's no different than someone, goes from French to English, Spanish to
Hmm.
English,
Hmm.
and vice versa. And that is why I see it as a superpower. But also, I think for a lot of people, they don't have the gift that I've been given to do this podcast and over 10 years to appreciate that. But because it comes so natural, it's an everyday thing. You don't think of it as a superpower. It's just something that you do. So in terms of how Caribbean American women um or Caribbean American broadly can leverage this superpower in work. How does this come into play? Maybe not everyone works in a global company, but how can they use this superpower to level up their leadership at work? How do you see that in play?
Don't hide it. Like, when we bring our full selves to work, I mean, it's like leaving a part of yourself at home. And when you, um, c- um, you know, break parts of yourself off, then you can't be your very best, right? And so don't hide your Caribbean perspective. It helps you to see solutions that others miss. Because people can make you feel funny and not in a good way about your accent or the way you wear your hair or the way that you look, and that pulls you off your game, and then you're second guessing, should you do this or should you be that or should you hide this, and where does that leave space for your brilliance to shine and to show through? So I say, in one of my approaches is to embrace it, just to embrace it.
I think it would be a very big oversight if I didn't bring up this point. So even before our current political climate, this idea of being confidently Caribbean or whatever, I would say was like, oh, wait a minute, because it's not something that, as you said before, you don't announce it at the door. Um, I can tell you how people knew I was Jamaican at work is, someone on my family would call me and then I went into it and then someone rolls over on the chair and like, did I hear an accent? That type of thing. So
Hmm.
much less now where there's a lot going on and people may not feel so confident about letting people know about their cultural heritage because there are assumptions that come with that. So given the realities of our current political climate, how do you still encourage people to lean in with this cultural intelligence and their identity at work?
People will make it up, right? So if you don't engage with the things that people assume and share the information that you are willing to share, well, then they'll make up whatever they want to make up. So, for example, I got married young, I had kids young. For people that looked at me, they had no idea how old I was. And there was one part of me that was like, who cares? And why should you know how old I am? But they had that mystery. They were making up stories about, well, I was a teen mom, or I was all of the things that I was not. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but it became a part of my story that I could not control. And I wanted people to be in rooms talking about my impact, not with that didn't add to my superpower, that didn't add to the growth or the potential for my trajectory within the organization that aligned with my goals, right? And so that's just who you are. It's not you're not going to be able to erase it, but it also gives you information on a decision about, is this the place where you want to be? Is this where you want to hang your hat? Or should you be working on your exit strategy?
All wonderful things. I mean, you are probably a person I was looking for back in 2012, 2013, when I was just navigating this solo and it's like, wait a minute. Um, the narrative that was created about me and there is a narrative that's created is that I was mean and unfriendly. And
Mhm.
every time I thought back to when they made the comment, I was like, but they were walking past my office and my face is buried in a computer screen. If you want to say hi, come in and say hi. But there was an expectation that I would say hi first. I'm like, I didn't even see you,
Yeah,
or I'm just really heads down focused on my work. I'm in a zone and it's just like, you're mean. And I'm like, but I'm not. I never, so people will create these narratives and then before you know it, some of these people, they have the ear of other people and before you know it, it has become your brand at work even if it's not true. And
right.
the funny thing about it is that some people even question what they're hearing, but because of who they're hearing it from, they can take that to be true. So what
Right.
you're saying is absolutely critical. Like part of this is taking control of the narrative and your
Right.
personal brand at work.
Yeah, and there's something that's magical too around storytelling. Like Caribbean cultures value like oral tradition, and the my experience of Caribbean storytelling, it's great. It connects people to your vision. Anything more powerful than someone else telling your story, and anything more powerful than any PowerPoint presentation, even if it had AI enhancements, right? And so use your traditions, use your superpowers, use who you are. It's in your DNA, it's in your bones. And it may not work in this moment, in this time, but the more practice you are with doing it, when it actually counts, it's going to matter so much, and you won't even look back and think about it. There was a woman that I was coaching, and she worked in a nonprofit organization, and similar. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to keep my head down. She had so many people counting on her, her family back in the islands, and her family here as well. I mean, she was a breadwinner for many households. And I just kept saying, just be your full, you are so amazing. Just be your full self everywhere you go. She stopped hiding who she was, her cultural intelligence, and stop worrying about the way that people would perceive, but they were perceiving her something very different from who she was. And the moment she stopped doing that, stopped worrying about the people who were intimidated about her full brilliance, she helped her company see solutions that others missed. She used her understanding about economics from the work that she did back home that completely, completely reimagined her company's approach to emerging markets. Like they were wanting to move into a space no one had even thought about. She had been sitting on a gold mine, and as a result, she was protected. She was sponsored by executives in a way that nobody had even imagined was possible for someone with her background. And so what I mean by this, they were clear about her value, they were clear about her impact, and guess what? Nobody messed with her here on out. Nobody messed with her here on out. And so all she had to do was be herself and to show up and cut out all the noise and all those folks who were, you know, just being aggressive for no reason because they were close to that power line, who ultimately had no power. She were all their supervisors.
You said so many things in here that I know I have to unpack. So that is a wonderful story. You said perception, but there are some people who are working from the fear because of what was done to them in a
Mhm.
prior organization when
Yeah.
it came to their cultural identity and presenting as such at work. So
Mhm.
there is a place where people may have wanted to do that, but something negative
Absolutely.
happened to them. And
Absolutely.
so, what do you say to those people who have been hurt by initially being confident and presenting that I am a proud Caribbean American woman? And, you know, they may have lost a job, they may have got demoted, they had adverse actions taken against them, in whether officially or in microaggressions. So what would you say to them about how they show up at work. And I think this pulls into a key, I think the key piece, which I don't know how to unlock it, and maybe, it's how much of the organizational personality should you be paying attention to determine how much you are showing, leaning forward with your heritage at work.
Yeah, I mean, you have to scope it out, right? But here's the thing, we have to do our research in making the determinations on we have a choice in where we work, right? We have a choice in who we give our time to. Like, we are a gift to these organizations. We can choose. And sometimes we don't always choose right. I know I hadn't always chose right. And sometimes I know very early on. And I begin working on my exit strategy. I partner with other folks on working on an exit strategy on, ooh, this feels funny and not in a good way. How do I get out? Right? Partner with people like me. I mean, I help women do that, do the analysis on, is this the right fit? Like, we have to be clear about the types of companies that we want to work for. Sometimes we are setting ourselves up to work for our own companies, right? Asking the questions, going when we go and interview for a job, we should hold very closely. Not only are they interviewing us, we should be interviewing them as well. And if we hear those things, like, we know what it feels like in those environments when we've been on the other end of the continuum, where we were not treated fairly, where we were not respected, where we were not valued, where we felt like we didn't belong. Not all companies, not all organizations are that way. And we have to hold that when we bump into those that are not, that make the decision, because life is short.
Yeah, and that this what you're saying too goes back to the other thing that I really want to make sure that you answer, like what happens to people who have experienced this hurt and what happens to people who just don't have the choice given the economy we're in. I want to leave this job, but I need this job cuz it's the job market is crappy and I can't just leave this job. So, we do understand choice, but with the market there isn't much choice, and we do know that there's a level of there's this level of intelligence that comes with my heritage, but I can't really do that based on my environment, or maybe they're still at the place that kind of treated them funny because they were very bold about their heritage, and maybe they're still reluctant because of that. So what do you say to these group of people who can't
Yeah.
leave
Yeah.
and
I've
those who've
been, yeah.
experienced that?
Yes, I've been there too. And in those situations, for myself, and that I will advise others, is to prioritize self-care, right? And so, you know, figure out what your boundaries are, figure out what your non-negotiables are, right? And so maybe you decide, like, what are the things that you have to leave at the door, when you walk in, and still um, be in a position where you can honor yourself and feel good about yourself. Take your PTO time, utilize your sick time. Make sure you are leveraging all of your health care, all your mental health care. Making sure you're putting things in place so you're not burning yourself out. And find those moments of joy. And when you do, enjoy the heck out of it, because you are going to need it. Love on your family, embrace your family, and work on an exit strategy.
I could tell you that's real. That's that's the radical self-care part that I want to get to, because there was a moment I was feeling very frustrated at work, and I just had to take a step back. And most of us, we know ourselves, we know the things that annoy us, the things that work us
Mhm.
up. And I had to put things in place to kind of check myself. But I also knew that I couldn't continuously check myself. I had to get accountability. Like, I would say, hey, if you see me doing this, check in and tell me, like, time out. If you see me complaining too much, you'd be like, girl, it's time to take that half day PTO or something.
That's right.
Because um we can't control the organization. We can influence it, but we can't control it. I can only control myself and my actions. And
Right.
so I have my PTO, have sick day,
Mhm.
and create boundaries around how how I w- I don't want to say how I want to spend my day, but how I want to experience my work day and what I want to be at the end of that work day before I go home to my family. And so this idea of radical self-care is really radical, because you've pointed out that Caribbean American women and Caribbean people, they're hardworking people. So this idea of radical self-care sometimes is like, we just work hard, and that's the one mode that we have. Talk to me about some of the tips that you feel are important for us to exercise this radical self-care, especially if we're in organizations that we can't really make the move right now. It's not the right fit. And so we have to maintain until we can do better.
Yeah.
Or maybe you are a hard worker and you love your organization, but you still need some radical self-care, because if you don't, maybe you burn out too quickly. So talk to me
Yeah.
about some of those
Yeah,
things.
I mean, sometimes radical self-care is like I have to continue to learn. I have to continue to to go. I have to continue to grind. What's their professional development policy? Invest in yourself while you're there. Like if they have tuition reimbursement, so maybe you go to school, right? To get some more education. Maybe you get a certification. Go hard on how you continue to invest in yourself without getting yourself locked in. I mean, some of those have loopholes, like if they
If they pay
invest
for
in
it,
you,
you got to be
you have
here
to
for the
stay a
next
little
5 years.
longer or whatever, right? So pay attention, pay attention to that. um Set some boundaries on like how long you actually work, so maybe you're not responding to emails late at night. Maybe uh you're not taking on additional projects, you're not signing on for additional work, like setting some boundaries for yourself. Get you an accountability buddy. Carrie Ann, that was one of the things that you said, like talking to somebody, making sure that you don't contribute to the noise, like putting some boundaries around sort of how you are feeling. Like don't trauma bound with anyone else, like in the organization. This manager is so awful, this is what, because that doesn't help you, right? That pulls you further into the garbage, and you want to release yourself. Work on your exit strategy. What is your next job? If you want to hustle, build yourself a side hustle. Set up a side hustle so you will have some, you know y'all not going to continue to do this to me money. So when you do need to pivot, if you hadn't found yourself something, you have a little bit of cushion. There are a number of things that you can do, but all that's focused on investing in you and determining what your next moves may be. Ask to do some shadowing with another department, with another team. Pick up a new skill, exploring some more about the organization, or the industry, or the field. Like if you're gonna burn out, burn out. I mean, if you're gonna go hard on something that's going to matter for the next three positions that you're gonna take up.
So, when you talked about the trauma bonding, I can tell you that that is a critical piece. Like, when you're at a company or you're in a place where everything you're kind of frustrated, everything annoys you. And
Mhm.
then you get caught up in the emotion of it. And I think, speaking from experience, you kind of it makes it worse.
Mhm.
the situation, and you kind of have to start, backpedaling. Like, you have a work friend, you know, I'm not, let's not talk about work issues right now. We know the manager bad, let them stay bad. I don't want to deal with it. But the other thing about having a side hustle is not just the money that you get. I think, as speaking as a hardworking Caribbean American woman, sometimes that side hustle is the distraction you need from the full time job. Not just the money, but just like it's where I'm putting my energies. Because sometimes at work, you're frustrated because what the solution that you're proposing is the right thing. You want to go, you want to do all these things, and you just have all this energy and zest for the
Yeah.
work that you're doing in your 9 to 5,
Mhm.
but you feel that that's not appreciated. They're giving
Right.
this to someone else.
Right.
Put that energy in a side
Into
project, a
something else.
side
Yes,
side hustle.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
the side hustle could be a source of income, but that side hustle could also be a source of
Of of
um
of
your
of release. Yeah.
of release of your energies, and also a playground, a sandbox for learning skills that you
Mhm.
can take other places. So at did you wanna say something? Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
I was just gonna say absolutely. I remember picking up, college courses, or I mean, there are so many free open source courses now that you could take just to occupy your mind, because sometimes these situations will make you think you're going mad, and
Absolutely.
just getting your mind healthy, getting your mind right. And you can do walks, you can do journaling. I mean, whatever you can do to center yourself and to find you peace, do that. I mean, exercise is not for everyone, journaling is not for everyone, meditating is not for everyone, but there is something for you to do. Find that.
Wonderful. So there are 2 more points and then we wrap up, right? You talked about leadership pathways in the beginning, right? And identifying leadership pathways. How do we begin to identify leadership pathways? And to be clear, I'm not just saying we want to get from manager to supervisor to, a title level, but, leadership could be, you know, it doesn't have to be the executive level. I guess that's what I'm saying. So how do we identify, because most of my audience may not be at the executive level, how do we begin to identify leadership pathways within our organization to grow? And then the last question, you had said your PhD thesis was, can we do it all, or are we just losing time? And I'm curious about what your findings are about that. So the first part is leadership pathways. How do we begin to assess what pathways are available to us in the organizations we're currently in?
Yeah, and when I say leadership, I'm not talking just about the highest levels in the organization. There are so many different ways to lead.
Mhm.
And when I think about leadership in its most purest form, is how are you connecting with others on a shared goal, and you are providing some strategic direction for how to get there, right? It could be on a project, it could be um, a special initiative. It could be in a meeting, right? Sometimes we go to meetings, no agenda, no direction, no outcomes. But how are you getting people organized and clear about where we were heading or what the outcomes, might be? And so you can lead in a variety of different ways. And some people don't want to lead, um, and groups of people, right? They want to be leaders in their own individual contributor way, and that's perfectly okay, as well. I want to come in, I want to put my head down, and I want to lead to exceeding expectations, and you know contributing in the ways that honor my worth, my belonging, and my brilliance, and not stepping on people along the way to get there. That's leadership too, right? And so being clear about what you want, um, and the impact that you want to have. And I would say one way on determining what that might be is two things. One, letting go of those personally held scripts on what leadership is and what leadership is not. And then, second of all, redefining what success might be. And it typically isn't just what people tell us that it has been, right? And leadership for Caribbean American women may not be the same thing as it has been for um, white men, for example, in these organizations that, quite frankly, were designed for white men, right? But I hold that leadership is not about just climbing, this proverbial corporate ladder, that it is about making progress, um, forward motion, not spending, time churning, old problems, and bringing people along with you, right? Building bridges and prioritizing community alongside profit. And Caribbean people know that very well. And your second question around this question that I have been holding since my youth. As Black women, can we do it all or do we just lose time? That wasn't my thesis, but it drove my thesis. And the answer, based on evidence, is yes, we can, but not all at the same time.
Ooh, ooh. I want to hear more. Not at the same time. Got it. And what does that mean? It means we can have a little bit here and then keep going, and then maybe we add a little bit more down the road. Is that what it looks like?
The reality is we don't have unlimited capacity, so we can't live our lives as if we do. This is piece that goes back to, equity and care. Like we can't do it alone. Your question, um, a few questions back around, um, if I have a family that I have to take care of. I mean, there was a time I had two small kids that were dependent upon me for 100% of everything that they needed. And I wanted a promotion and I wanted to keep my job. Um, and we were in a bad economy. September 11th just happened. The stock market had crashed. I was working on Wall Street. Uh, yeah, I didn't need to be a disruptor. Like, if I was going to quit my job, I needed to do it responsibly,
Right.
not because I was pointing at how they didn't live up to their commitments for Black women in the organization, right? I could be upset about um, them not living up to their commitments about Black women in the organization. There were processes and channels at that time through affinity groups that we had, and we could talk about it, but and provide information like through surveys, but I didn't have to be like out front, in somebody
Right.
in someone's face about it. Or not. That's what I mean. If they're, announcing they're wanting to do, layoffs, then it may not be the time that I raise my hand and say, hey, I want part-time hours. when I have a full-time job.
Right, right. So wisdom, discernment are key tools here to
Absolutely.
use. So Dr. Kerry, I mean, this has been a wonderful discussion, and I wanted to ask you any last words you want to impart to our listeners, particularly Caribbean American women, as it comes to leading boldly and brilliantly in today's America.
Yeah, I would say, um, I don't want Caribbean American women to just survive this moment. I want them to lead through it, right? Through my research and my work, I've seen how bringing your full self to leadership, leveraging cultural wisdoms, and building from your ancestral strengths creates transformative results. And the future needs leaders who think differently, who build bridges, and who prioritizes um, community alongside profits. And yeah, I just truly believe that this moment is challenging as it is, and we know it's challenging. We're all living through it. Is preparing Caribbean American women to lead, not just effectively, but transformatively. And so I've always been an ally and a co-conspirator in this work, and I am committed to like walking alongside you and supporting you and creating spaces where this bold leadership can flourish. And so you can visit my website, you can follow me on social media. My website's kerrymitchellbrown.com, and I'm on all social medias, Dr. Kerry M. Brown.
Thank you for that. I mean, you've really given us a nice summary of how heritage is a driver for professional strength, right? And we have these things that we were, you know, if not born with it, had access to it through by just by way of being part of the culture. And it's what what most people might need is the confidence to tap into those things that we already have and to lead and just get specific guidance, because I think that's where the work comes in, right? Like, we are talking generally, but for someone else might need specific help based on this public entity, or a privately held company. I mean, on that strength alone, two different personality if it's a publicly traded versus a private company. So
Yeah.
all of this is going to be based on the type of organization, the industry that you're in, the type of work that you do. So Dr. Kerry shared all her information. I will make sure I put that in the show notes. And Dr. Kerry, thank you for being on the podcast and to help, you know, give word and validate some of the experience that I've been having, but also you've also helped me to recognize some of the things that in the last couple of years that I stopped doing because I'm like, I want to have a peaceful life at work. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And as I love to say at the end of every episode, walk good.